Here we go. Hello, everyone. Feel free to move in closer so you can, get the best experience. Welcome to our session. Welcome to Innovate at Speed with Trusted Software and Data in AWS Marketplace. So I'm Mona Chada. I'm Director of Infrastructure ISVs for the AWS Partner Organization. So when we talk about infrastructure, we mean ISVs that cover categories like security, networking, data and analytics, AI/ML, storage, et cetera. And I've been with AWS for 10 years, so I'm really excited to have this conversation with you today. And we'll have more of a fluid conversation versus presenting to you. And I'm joined by Wick Crump, who is Director of America's Field and Worldwide Channels for AWS Marketplace, and John Mason, who is Global Head of Platform for the London Stock Exchange Group. So welcome, John, and thanks, Wick, for being here as well. Okay, great. So let's jump into it. So before we kind of get into the content here, just a quick overview of the agenda today. So one, we're going to talk a little bit about how marketplaces, cloud marketplaces, are really contributing to digital transformation strategies of our larger enterprise customers. And then we'll talk a little bit about the value of AWS Marketplace and AWS Data Exchange. How many of you in the audience are familiar already with AWS Marketplace or Data Exchange? Oh, great. So this is going to be, some of this will be repeat, but you'll learn some new tidbits as well. And then Forrester conducted a study, an economic impact study, polling our customers, our buyers, and sellers in the marketplace. And so Wick's going to walk you through some of the findings from that study. And then finally, John will come on and talk a bit about how the London Stock Exchange has this sort of unique role of being both a buyer and a seller in the marketplace, and specifically on the data exchange side, being a seller of that, and then being a buyer of software in the marketplace. And then we'll do a bit of Q&A with John, and then of course we can do Q&A with the team as well. So that's a quick summary, and now we can get started. So one of the things that we're seeing with today that's happening is that cloud, software, and data are the core fundamentals when it comes to digital transformation. And especially, we're finding that customers across all different segments, all different verticals like financial services, healthcare, life sciences, they're really looking at how do they accelerate their onboarding onto the cloud, especially in this now, economy that we're going into, right? So they're moving out of their data centers, moving more into, and out of their hybrid architectures, and accelerating their migration to the cloud. So we're seeing that trend a lot from customers. And at the same time, with cloud marketplaces, what we're finding is that that is helping to accelerate and speed digital transformation strategies. And so that's also helping customers get to the cloud faster. And so in fact, we have some stats here from Gartner stating that by 2023, 75% of organizations are going to have these comprehensive digital transformation roadmaps in place that are really going to look at disrupting and really helping to contribute to innovation. And that by 2024, we'll have cloud marketplaces that will end up being the primary channel for procuring infrastructure software that contribute to their operations. And if you think about that, think about the innovation that ends up helping enterprise customers focus on. And then lastly, by 2023, this is just like next year, right? So really fast. 50% of applications that will be sold via cloud marketplaces. So now think of that with that innovation that is totally accelerated by the fact that you're able to now procure at speed through these marketplaces. So it's just, if you look at it, there's a lot of speed and innovation that's happening really, really quickly now. And ultimately, with all this, customers are expecting to get returns, right? Healthy returns out of the investments that they're making in migrating over to the cloud, as well as investing in cloud marketplaces. And so one of the key things that we also see is that a key component to digital transformation is the incentive to be able to modernize your systems as you migrate over and to the cloud. And so moving to the cloud gives you that opportunity to look at how you can modernize your software and your whole sort of supply chain. And when you look at that, you got to think about your strategy more holistically, and not just about individual facets, right? It can't be just I'm just going to focus on specific projects and then look at migration and then think about innovation later on and then not look at the rest of your supply chain. Because the core thing is that as you're looking to modernize and migrate, you have a whole bunch of third-party software that's associated to that, and that you're looking to also run in the cloud. And so, as you're looking at your overall cloud migration strategy, you need to also think about how that impacts impacts innovation and how you're implementing software, you're procuring software. So overall, your supply chain. And so again, thinking about your strategy more holistically versus only focusing on sort of like tactical areas. So what we found is that in doing that, the supply chain is a really understanding your procurement supply chain is a very important ingredient. And specifically, that's kind of how we came up with and started innovating on AWS Marketplace. So we started looking at all of the key components that enterprise customers need in order to help them with their cloud migration journey, helping them modernize their applications. And so in that way, what we've done is look at Marketplace being that source of where customers are able to innovate and transform their software. They're able to help accelerate their migration and their modernization. And then at the same time, control and govern their budgets. Ensuring that they have certain, not everyone has access to software, that they are able to have certain stakeholders access software when they need to in order to innovate, and then ultimately be able to optimize at scale. And so when you look at customers who are either migrating to the cloud or moving off of their data centers or any of their hybrid architectures, they need to look at their third-party solutions and how they want to innovate quickly and faster. And so AWS Marketplace helps them do that. And then at the same time, though, while you're doing that, you don't want to, you need to have that control and governance, but you want that to balance it with that speed and agility to help, to control the sort of like who's accessing what and to control your budgets, right? That's going to be a big thing, especially as we kind of move into this new year. So we're helping customers with innovation and scale and migrating and modernizing, controlling and governing, and as well as optimizing at scale. But we're also helping ISVs. And one of the key things that we're doing for ISVs is one, not only giving them access to new customers, but also giving them access to the features to help them innovate faster in terms of procurement. So helping them contract the way that they want to. So for example, doing things like private offers, right? So when customers are wanting to maybe just work through a subscription pay-as-you-go model, but then graduate up to a more multi-year agreements with specialized terms and conditions, we have that capability. So when we look at the sort of roadmap of AWS Marketplace, we really anchor it around these sort of 4 pillars, if you will, so that one, ISVs can run and scale, and that customers have that ability to innovate and transform and to be able to control and govern their environments. And so one of the key things that there's sort of, as we sort of talked about, as we learned and worked with customers as well as ISVs, one of the key things that we heard is that there's really 6 key areas of supply chain transformation. And first starts with software and having best-of-breed software available so that you are able, like customers are able to access that software and innovate faster and have that running in the cloud. So having that available is very key. So again, and also having a broad selection of application portfolio modernization. So being able to not only have like software available in different ways that you can deploy it. For example, SaaS, having SaaS-based applications, or if you're running containers, having containers available. So also having the different ways in which you can procure and deploy software. These are some, these are some core things that we heard from customers wanting to have those as options in order to sort of manage their environment. The other thing is, give us the ability to make our transactions and procurement go faster. We want the processes to be easier and simple. We want to be able to then focus more on innovation versus focusing on the steps of procurement. So that's one of the areas that we looked at when we started innovating on AWS Marketplace and developing features. The other key thing is enhancing governance and control, so being able to understand who has access to what software, being able to control, for example, giving access to certain stakeholders, but not controlling them so much that they can't innovate. And then helping them optimize IT spend, so budgets, for example. So especially as we're kind of going into this economic downturn, if you will, it's going to be very key to manage your budgets. And so what we've done on the marketplace side is we've developed features and capabilities and have APIs that integrate to your back-end systems, so you can connect to your budgets and you can make sure that there's notifications when you hit certain budget levels. We have it integrated with our budget services that help you manage that and give you that real-time visibility. And then finally, we heard that being able to incorporate professional support and expertise when they need to. So these are all areas that really contribute to how enterprises today are transforming their supply chain more holistically. And I think the other thing is, so that's kind of how we envision sort of marketplace. And so as a result of that, you see sort of how we develop Marketplace. And a lot of you are already familiar with Marketplace, but we have over 13,000 transactable listings. We have over 3,000 ISVs with 1,300 consulting partners. We're running in 25 regions, as well as we have 2 million plus monthly active subscriptions with over 330,000 active subscribers. So quite a bit of customers coming to the marketplace, and they're transacting across 70 different categories across security, networking, database, et cetera. And then in addition, we have AWS Data Exchange that, again, gives you that depth of the portfolio around data providers, data sets. We have 3,500 public data products that are available. We have over 1,000 free public data products available as well. Support for private offers, which is kind of critical especially as you start to scale your business and you are looking at longer term agreements where more specialized, customized terms and conditions for your larger enterprise customers. And we have different ways in which data delivery is provided via files, tables, APIs. So having that flexibility in the portfolio is kind of really critical. And this is just a sort of sprinkling, like I think everyone always has like a NASCAR slide of like all the different solutions that are available. And so these, again, this is just some of the more popular ISVs that transact through the marketplace. And John will probably mention a few of these that his company has, that the London Stock Exchange has actually procured through the marketplace. But as you can see, these are all really best of breed solutions that are available. And then the other thing is that, again, in terms of like product, in terms of transactions, we talked a little bit about having private offers, right? Having, flexibility in how ISVs are able to transact. And so what's really critical is being able to speed up those transactions. And so having a fully transactable catalog. So sometimes you see catalogs that you click on it and then you can't really do anything. Well, with Marketplace, everything is transactable. You're able to ensure that you're aligning to private offers. We have a broad range of different pricing models that range from hourly, monthly. We even have seconds to more longer term agreements to bring your own license as well. And then standardized license terms are critical, especially as you look at, we have, you have common cloud terms. And so one of the things that we offer are, we worked with a lot of customers to actually get and align on common cloud terms that ISVs can leverage as their EULA in the marketplace. So it helps to really streamline the whole procurement process. And then finally, we have consulting partner private offers, which is a business that Whit runs, and he'll talk a little bit more about that. But that's really taken off. That's something that we're seeing increasingly, especially more ISVs. And maybe for those of you who are ISVs in the audience, like, do you transact via consulting partners? Or if you leverage them, then that's a key thing that we've heard that that's an important ingredient to speeding up transactions. And then the other thing is, again, I talked about this as well, is having the flexibility of the different payment options. That's really critical, especially as we move into this new sort of economy, is having the ability and flexibility to offer different transaction types or payment types. So I won't spend too much time on that, but as you can see, there's all different types and flavors available. And finally, kind of looking at balancing speed with governance and control. So I talked a lot about, sort of some features that the ISVs have, but these are features focused on on buyers. So things like private marketplace. What that does is it allows an enterprise customer to take a portion of the AWS Marketplace catalog and only expose that to their internal stakeholders. And then they're able to manage budgets better, et cetera, because they only have a portion of that catalog that's available to their stakeholders. And of course, there's options in the private marketplace where you can then, if one of your developers decides, hey, I need a security product, I need a firewall, they can go and ask, and it's not available in the in your version of the private marketplace, you can actually make those requests. So it gives that flexibility, but with that same control, allowing you to also have that control and maintaining that. And then I mentioned a little bit around procurement system integration. So those are things where you're integrating to backend systems like Coupa and Ariba, right? So you're able to integrate to what you have, your systems that you have today. And then things like managed entitlements. So this is important, especially when you're managing licenses and software titles. So you know how many licenses you have, so you can manage your budgets better overall. And then you're able to get smarter on how you want to negotiate with an ISV in the next sort of round of negotiations. And then I started talking about this, but ultimately this all boils down to being able to optimize your budget and your cost management solutions. And so we have a variety of different ways in which that's transacted via, or that Marketplace has different types of features and that allow customers to manage their budgets and their spend. And so there's things like, for example, as a customer and an ISV, you're able to offer flexible payment terms to your end customer. So these are things like you can schedule out when the customer pays out, and you can make that available to the customer. So we have different ways where you can do that. We talked a little bit about standardized license terms already. We had talked about procurement system integration. The other thing is we have cost allocation tagging and vendor meter tagging, which really helps to improve transparency around any of the underlying costs drivers that you have within AWS services as well as within your software. So now, again, you can tag how much you're actually deriving through these different software applications. And that's all integrated with AWS Budgets and Cost Explorer. So again, giving you the tools that you need to manage your budgets better. And so these are things like your CFO wants it, your IT manager needs all this information. And then we talked a lot about private offers. And then just the other thing is that, in all of these, we kind of overlaid a little bit that you can read sort of the captions below. They're all around this total economic impact study that Whit's going to talk more about. So I'm not going to mention it too much because the data points are already there. But I'm going to now transition it over to Whit, who's going to talk more about Marketplace channel programs, features, and our Forrester ROI study. Take it away, Whit.
All right, so I'm going to fast forward past some of the fancy information.
Thanks,
Mona. One of the things I do at Marketplace is I lead our worldwide channel programs, and Mona spoke briefly about private offers, basically the instantiation of price and terms to a customer from an ISV facilitated by AWS Marketplace, and that launched in 2017. And based on feedback from our partner community, they wanted to be included in Marketplace's ability to speed customers' procurement. So in 2018, we launched Consulting Partner Private Offers, which essentially inserted or created a seller of record for a consulting partner to be authorized by an ISV to resell to a customer, so that ISV has that contractual direct relationship with an end customer, because many customers use consulting partners as a trusted advisor and a procurement method. And by the way, I use consulting partners as a broad term that captures GSIs, SIs, resellers, MSPs, just a little bit easier than having to repeat all those things time and time again. And that's a very a one-off, very bespoke type of a transaction, anything from very small things to up to very large transactions. And as a quick follow-up to that, we launched Solution Provider Private Offers. And so if you're a managed service provider or someone's doing a really high volume and you're in the Solution Provider program with AWS for your own and managing accounts on behalf of that customer, we wanted to build a simplified transactional method where ISVs could say to a large community of consulting partners, hey, look, here are the terms of our relationship. You can extend those terms to your customer at any time in those accounts you own and manage. And so SPPO has become a very popular way for consulting partners who do have that account ownership to transact with their customers. Now, throughout the course of time in our channel program history since we launched CPPO in 2018, we've gotten a lot of feedback from partners. And I'll be talking about professional services here in just a moment. But we talk about software, we talk about the actual transactional ability. It's the services that tie everything together. And I'll get into the next slide. But also, how do we enable our customers and our partners at scale? So earlier this year, we launched the AWS Marketplace Training Academy, which is an online instructional tool where customers and partners can basically come, take video classes, take training, get certifications. And that's been very popular, so I encourage all of you to go onto the website and search for that, and you can take any of this training for free. And last but not least is we know that a good amount of transactions have some level of financing involved. That's either for a customer who wants longer payment terms than perhaps the ISV or the consulting partner wants to extend, or the ISV wants to reduce the days of sales outstanding. So we do have financing partners that we can direct you to and take you through the CPPO process to help solve those kinds of those opportunities. All right, so professional services. We launched this at reInvent in 2020, so we're having our second birthday this week. Actually, it was yesterday, 2 years ago, yeah. But this was a big piece of feedback was, the transactional and procurement capabilities are really exciting and interesting to a lot of our partners and to our ISVs. But, from our consulting partner standpoint, a good bit of their revenue stream comes from the services of the implementation, educating customers, helping them when they don't have core competencies in maybe AWS or in the associated software technologies, bring in one of these partners to actually do the services implementation and sometimes actually manage that in the long term. So if you think about the benefits that Mona talked about for Marketplace, as well as the procurement ease of use for private offers, CPPO, that's now extended to professional services. And in just a short amount of time, we have several thousand listings on AWS Marketplace around professional services that stretch from anything to pinpoint ISV solutions to more holistic, ongoing managed services, for example, security as a managed service. And it's been a fast-growing part of our business, and it's a lot of the same benefits. And I'm going to get into a lot of the economic aspects of this when we get into the Forrester studies, by the way. But one of our headline topics today is data. And so I want to shift gears to AWS Data Exchange, or what we call ADX. Now, John, who's joining me here to my left, is going to get into a lot of the details of London Stock Exchange Group's personal experience using ADX. But for those of you who aren't familiar with ADX, very similar to Marketplace, it streamlines and accelerates the procurement and integration process with the sale of data products. So you think about data files, data sets, data tables. So we have over 300 different data providers on ADX selling over 3,500 different kinds of data products. So like I said, similar to the benefits of Marketplace, customers are using this very regularly to modernize their data supply chain. So if you think about the fourth benefit here, and I'm not going to go through all 9 of them verbatim, but you think about streamlined data procurement and ingestion. So we're making it very easy for you to find and buy the data products that you need, and also launch those directly into the AWS services that you're using. So you can get value very, very quickly out of it. Also, from a risk perspective, this is a curated catalog by the AWS team. So we spend a lot of time looking at these products, looking at the data providers to make sure that they're truly commercially available. And so it's a way for you as a customer to reduce your risk profile when you're procuring these types of products. So if you think about things like fragmented data sets, like you buy a data set, can't really use it all that well because there's pieces of it missing or it's corrupted or whatnot, or you're buying duplicate data sets, you're basically increasing your spend for no real reason. And then last but certainly not least is number 9. If you're a customer who has a spend commitment with AWS, just like with Marketplace, that ADX spend is going to help you retire that commitment over time. Some very pretty animations on this slide. Yes, this is a high dollar slide. So look, from an effective data sourcing team, different companies handle data sourcing in different ways, and ones that are very sophisticated typically have a team of folks that are out there doing this. And I want to really focus on 2 new roles out of the 6 that are really enabled and empowered by the ADX platform, and that's the data scouts / strategists and the data reviewers. And there's a good headline here coming from a McKinsey study, but from a data scout and strategist perspective, these are the folks that are partnering with the line of business owners to really understand what the needs of that business are. So it's not like, hey, we're just going to go buy some data set where we think we need it, but it's really having a strategy around the procurement, ingestion, and usage of various kind of data sets to extend and get a strong ROI from the business. And also they're going to manage those data sets in the long term. And then secondly are the data reviewers. And these are the folks that are actually going to evaluate the ongoing usage of data sets and also taking a look at the risk of using that data. There's a lot of PII in data sets, a lot of compliance associated with data sets. You buy, for example, like I have a geospatial background. And when you're buying geospatial data sets, you have very specific terms of use around, is it going to be, digital terrain models or measurements of things of that nature. So you want to make sure that you're using the licenses accordingly, or you could, become subject to audits downstream. And so those reviewers, in parallel with these data scouts and strategists, are going to work hand in hand to make sure you're getting most out of what you've procured. And according to a McKinsey study, these two roles alone, empowered by ADX, can create a long-term cost savings over the course of time of anywhere between 10 and 35% cost savings in data spend.
Great.
So now we're starting to get into some of the economics. So I'm going to switch gears.
This is like the data slides.
Yeah. So now we're getting into the good stuff.
Yeah.
Really good stuff when it comes to the economics and what's in the ROI for you all. So Marketplace has been around. We just had our 10th birthday. Just had our 10th birthday, and business has grown. It's going well. We have, as Mona said, we have a strong customer base. And so we had some conversations with Forrester earlier in the year, and wanted to have them conduct some studies to create evidence of what we believe the value for customers, what a third-party point of view where they have full editorial control. And so they did 3 studies. One is a thought leadership paper that I'm going to go into first, and then there was a customer total impact study, and then there was an ISV total impact study, which we refer to as sellers. So first off, the thought leadership paper. They went out and surveyed over 750 customers of various sizes worldwide, so a very large data set. And the headline was pretty generically, is that almost 80% of customers viewed online marketplaces as a place for data and software procurement as a way to decrease their risk profile. And I'm going to go into what that means in terms of the risk profile in here in just a minute, because I think everybody in the room is probably familiar with like shadow IT. So I think it's an often used term, but let's get into like the meat of what that actually means in here in just a minute. But also from an online marketplace perspective, as part of onboarding vendors, it's been a pretty labor-intensive process to discover what the landscape is of any software category, be it infrastructure, industry verticals, horizontal applications, and then the wide variety of data. And I think customers are viewing, per this leadership study, that marketplaces make it a lot easier to get that kind of education and understand what their options are. That way they're not leaning on the incumbent vendors time and time again. It's a way for them to be able to innovate. And then last but not least is the ability just to transact. Like buying things is not as easy as it would sound. I think is probably, if there's customers in the room, you all realize that. While there's a lot of people around who are willing to take your money, that process of getting to the end of the transaction, actually, ingesting the data or software is not always a very easy process. And then there's the governance around it, making sure the right people have the right access so you're not overusing or underusing it, subjecting yourself to audits or creating a shelfware situation where you're buying things that you're never actually using. So some of the key insights and implications from the thought leadership study, obviously, data and software is a very critical part of anyone's business, but the vast or dramatic piece of feedback was the governance is overlooked. And that seems like probably something that shouldn't be the case. Yeah. But the reality is, look, as line of business owners, you want to get things done. Sometimes people cut some corners and they just buy things, right? And so that governance model is either not as strong as it needs to be or isn't as adhered to as it probably should be. Now, some partners and customers were a little more direct in this study and stated pretty clear that risk management is something that is often just flat out ignored, which took, I think, me personally by surprise, because you think the word risk management and ignored in the same sentence is a big red flag. And then there's the shadow IT piece that I was just talking about, right? Is, a customer's going to swipe a credit card because they just want to get to enroll and get a piece of software in hand, and aren't involving procurement, aren't involving legal. The guardrails of the business are being worked around. And when you talk to customers personally, one-on-one, a lot of times they'll admit at the C-level, yeah, I probably only have my finger on about half of what's going on in terms of my procurement budgets. And then last but not least on this one is, tautological, I kind of put this in as sort of a tongue-in-cheek, 50-cent word here. But basically, when you talk to all these customers, they're all basically saying the same thing time and time again, but just using different words. Is they want to be more agile, they want to be able to buy a lot more easily and be able to innovate, and they want to invest in new procurement channels because the way that they've always done things isn't matching the way that they're buying AWS services. Buying third-party software, data, and services is something that should be as easy as the way they buy AWS, and the speed of those two kinds of cycles aren't matching each other, and it's slowing down their ability to innovate. And you all can see all the implications on the right-hand side of this slide. I've kind of spoken to them. Happy to take questions on this after the presentation. Now, first off is the customer impact study. I kind of already hit on this first point around, almost 80% of them are viewing online marketplaces as a way to reduce their risk profile. There's obviously the efficiency through the procurement process. We talked about standardized contracts and enterprise contract at marketplace. If you think about high risk and low risk transactions, high risk transaction might be something that includes PII or financial information. You're looking for a little more stringent terms around limitations of reliability, indemnification, things like that. But if you're buying something like observability software, where it's really just kind of looking at the landscape, not really touching really critical, sensitive information, you probably want terms to be a little bit easier. And we came up with this the standardized contract process after doing thousands of transactions through Marketplace, and we kind of figured out, hey, look, like 98% of all of these contracts are virtually the same, and we're negotiating the same parts of the contract time and time again. So why don't we just create a template that many customers and ISVs have already agreed to, and then that only leaves that last 2% if there needs to be an addendum or something. And this has kind of been an unsung hero feature for AWS Marketplace, because you're talking about a negotiation process that can take a month, and now you're talking about really speeding it up to be just a couple of days. And then there's the onboarding effort for new vendors. Talked a little bit about the discoverability process, making it easy for not just business owners, but procurement folks to go out and look, say, hey, what are my options in a security category? Like, who are the vendors? I've been buying from the same company for years. What does next-gen software really look like? So we make that education process quite simple, but also from an onboarding perspective, aside from the contractual piece, there's the integration with AWS billing, usage reports, things of that nature. It makes it quite simple for customers to be able to take a new vendor and fold them into their existing process so they can manage them on a monthly and yearly basis.
Yeah. And then just to add to that is that the ROI that these organizations achieved were like over 550%.
Yeah.
With a payback under 6 months. So especially like that is a very core part. And like this study will also have a link to it so that you can read it. And also like find the tidbits of information, then bring this back to your teams, bring this back to your CFO, bring this back to your IT teams, right? Like, if you're an ISV and trying to justify like why, invest more in Marketplace, like show the study and show the data points that are in there, because these are real results, tangible results.
And the reason that the ROI is so high is there's actually a pretty low bar for a customer to learn how to use Marketplace. We make it very simple. We always work backwards from the customers, so we try to make that process pretty intuitive for them, and then we also have a team that helps train them. So a little bit of an investment up front from a human resources perspective. Then once you got it down over the course of the years, makes that ROI quite high, especially if you're thinking about everybody's time is worth money. And you think about legal resources, et cetera. These are pretty highly paid individuals, so you can save them 3.5 weeks of time. That starts to add up. So we talked about the customers, wanted to show it side by side from a seller perspective. So from an ISV standpoint, so you got 81% of customers achieved an ROI, ISVs. Now from an ISV perspective, there's a little bit more of an investment because they're the ones extending the private offers to customers, and they're going to have operational investments, human resources investments from that perspective. But these three numbers are the ones that I really want to tattoo into your brain as you walk out of here, which is 80% richer deal sizes. And there's a couple of things that play into that. One is, first off, at a high level, customers are now able to think about their IT spend strategically. They're matching their AWS spend with a third-party spend. They're thinking long-term, and so they're able to spend more because they have a longer-term view of what they're going to be doing in the future. And also you combine that with spend commitments to AWS, thinking about, okay, look, if I'm going to have a better deal with AWS, how do I start to put more into that basket? So customers do tend to spend more. Because of all the customer benefits that we were talking about in the previous slide, it's a 27% higher win rate. And this was evidence that was collected by Forrester. What they did is they went out and created a composite company, interviewing 10 different customers of different sizes, and then a number of different personas within those individual customers. And so we link that back to what's going on with the sellers. The customer has gravity when it comes to Marketplace because they're like, this is a really easy experience from a lot of different angles. So they're pulling ISVs into that. And then from a sales cycle perspective, it's standardized contract, the ease of private offers, making that procurement cycle a whole lot easier. And they're also thinking about, from a budgetary perspective, overall IT, instead of it just being bucketed into pinpoint software, data or services.
Yep. Okay,
all right.
Now hand it off to John.
Oh. I need more hands.
Yeah.
I know. Do you honestly?
Thanks very much. You too. Really interesting. Thank you. And can I just quickly ask, well, firstly, thank you for being here. I realise this is the end of the conference. You should get a new coloured lanyard or a T-shirt or something for actually attending events after 12 o'clock on the final day, but thank you very much. Who's familiar with just financial services? Who's got a financial services background? It just helps me, because I could construct a whole sentence without a noun or a verb, financial services acronyms. So I just want to make sure where to pitch it. So given the fact no one put hands up, I'll make sure I explain everything as I go through. So yes, John Mason, the accent probably gives it away, London Stock Exchange. But also London Stock Exchange Group. And as a group, we're a much broader church in that regard as to what we do. Yes, there is the stock exchange itself. I think it's perhaps quite apt that some of the talk today is around the data exchange. If you think of that at its basis level, if you like, which is an asset exchange, that's how we started life. We're an asset exchange at the end of the day. We have market makers, we have market takers, just as there are data makers and data takers. And we sit on both sides of the fence. But we started in 1698, so it's true, as you get older, you worry less about your birthdays, so we hit our 324th
wow,
birthday.
That's crazy.
So 1698, John Costain, Jonathan's Coffee House in London, nice. Where he put up the first list of commodities and stocks. And then in 1801, 103 years later, the actual formal stock exchange was born. So I don't think it'll take that long, given the pace you guys operate at. I don't think it'll be 103 years. Or it'd be interesting to what data exchange looks like in 103 years.
We were celebrating
time.
10 years, so yeah.
But you move faster than us. But that's obviously the foundation stones of the organisation. If I move across the slide that we've got here, something like London Clearing House, LCH, in 2018, for the first time, over $1 quadrillion, so $1,077 trillion, cleared through the London Clearing House in 2018. So substantial volume, substantial infrastructure to global financial markets. And then some of the names you see in between, the likes of May Street, the likes of Refinitiv, those are all our data maker, if I can put it that way, organizations. That's where we create data, that's where we look to provide data to the marketplace as a whole, to the broader marketplace as opposed to AWS Marketplace specifically, but we provide that to the marketplace as a whole as a data vendor. And that ranges from real-time, sort of nanosecond type of provision of data, right the way through to non-real-time data provisioning. In terms of some of the specifics around the data that we have, I won't list through all of these, but it's at the non-volatile or less volatile end of the spectrum. It's things such as 13 million private company. Most financial data sits around what I would call assets, institutions, and prices. Assets, thinks of those as the instruments themselves, the securities, the equities, the bonds, the warrants, the derivative transactions. They're the assets, they're the securities. Institutions, they're entities. So everything is bought on behalf of an entity, for an entity, by an entity. You interact with a counterparty, with an organization. And then there are the prices and the quotes that go with that. So what did I buy Amazon for on NASDAQ? Who bought it? It was, for example, Deutsche Bank trading with Citigroup, going through an interdealer broker like TP ICAP. Those are all your entities. They happen to be trading in a particular corporate bond. That's your instrument, and they traded at a price. So in essence, most of what you see on the screen there is related to and sits around that type of data, financial services data. Some of the notable ones, 8 million financial price updates per second. So we distribute that to typically over our real-time network, either to a UI or through feeds into applications, and something like 520,000 equity quotes across 297 exchanges. So again, we ingest all of that data, bring it into our environment, concord it, and then provide it. And that's where our relationship with the likes of AWS Data Exchange comes in, is because you've got to start thinking about it as an ecosystem. So we will do an element of that concording of data. So for example, when an instrument goes ex-dividend, 297 exchanges you can guarantee will describe that 297 different ways. So we will concord that data, we'll provide that data, but then we'll increasingly work with our clients who are looking for that data in the likes of ADX. So it's an ecosystem rather than a competitive environment, it's more of a collaborative environment. In terms of our engagement with AWS Marketplace, you've heard the guys speak about it a bit. We sit on both sides. We're a taker and a maker, as it were. So what we take is principally at the moment from a software perspective. So we take the likes of Salesforce, Datadog. I'm going to put a British accent on it. Forgive me, Zscaler, whether it be Zscaler. Apologies. So we provision our capability from AWS in that regard. The rationale behind that, as the slide touches on, it's been 50% quicker in terms of onboarding that capability. That's equated to perhaps month and a half of saved time in terms of which we can then be up and running with the software that we source and procure. Some of the incentives that Whit touched on with regards to our AWS committed spend. So obviously we are quite a heavy user of AWS infrastructure componentry within our underlying capability, and we use our relationship through AWS Exchange in the marketplace to actually offset against that through the private placing agreement. And we've seen some internal cost savings with regard to more streamlined processes. So we very much benefit from our relationship on that taking side, if I can put it that way, from AWS Marketplace. As a data maker, in terms of putting data into Exchange, we're starting to sort of dip our toe into the water, principally around the likes of ESG data, where we're working closely with a large US investment bank, very well known US investment bank. And that's where, as this touches on, that's very much client-led consumption. So the previous slide to this that the previous slide to me speaking that Whit sort of finalized and summarized on, some of those points are exactly what our clients are looking for. They're looking for that standardization. They're looking for a single sourcing of somewhere where they can go for that data. And so we then have to put our data where we want to meet, or where our clients want to meet us. So that could be then ADX, that could be Redshift, it could be other data environments within the marketplace, but typically we would provision that data where our clients want to see it. And someone like this large, say, notable investment bank, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to name them or not. I know they've gone public at other events. And as a consequence of the fact they've gone public at other events, I don't think they'll mind me saying it's Goldman Sachs. But they're certainly at the vanguard of looking to streamline that whole data sourcing, ingestion and provisioning ecosystem. And it is more of a, what I'd call sort of straight through processing, almost just in time data delivery, where they're looking to offer their clients data and they would like us to provision that through ADX, but also with all the appropriate rights management, all the appropriate governance that enables them to do that and their client to use that data in the jurisdiction in which they sit and so on. Definitely a TCO. I knew I couldn't get through this without getting an acronym in there, total cost of ownership. That's really where looking at people, where you're looking at saying what's the cost of providing to the ultimate business process. Not just the licensing of the data, but actually what do you have to do to that data to then make it fit the business process that you want to apply it to. And that typically means a lot of data management, a lot of data manipulation, and that costs. And so by, again, standardizing through something like ADX, then that organization can reduce that cost and therefore reduce their TCO. And then a lovely word, composability and security, built-in composability. In essence, how easy is it to create compositions that are more fit for purpose? Most of what we're doing now within the data world is trying to move more to a logical environment and less away from a physical environment. And I've got these bright lights shining at me, but I'm looking into the audience and I reckon there's a few that are familiar with CDs and LPs and so on. But when you bought a CD, you didn't really get to determine what the songs on that CD were. You got the songs on that CD. Now you operate in a much more logical environment with tools like Spotify and so on. You put your own logical collection of songs together and you call them a playlist.
Yeah.
So moving more towards logical collections of data and the ability for the client to drive the composition of the data they want and need, rather than necessarily supplying what we think they want and providing it as a product, which is a bit more fixed. So again, those are the appeals on the delivery side that our clients are demanding and that we're looking to drive as well. And that really touches on this final slide, because I'm conscious that Mona wants to get to Q&A, which is that physical side today means lots of data is provided that people don't necessarily want. So there's waste in terms of procurement and storage. People are storing data that, again, they don't necessarily need. It typically is disparate data. Again, if I go back to my analogy, how many people bought either different CDs or they bought LPs and they had the same song across different formats. So you had the same song on a CD, then you went and bought a best of or greatest hits and you got the same song again on that. Again, does that happen in the data world? And how can we get rid of that single, how can we drive to that single sourcing of data and get away from disparate data sets? And then all the cost of management and infrastructure that goes with just handling vast quantities of data. And I touched on some of the early slides when you're talking about 8 million updates a second, when you're talking about 570,000 updates in terms of collecting data and prices across exchanges. That's just a lot of data. So you really want to just work with the data you need rather than carry lots of redundant data around with you. And that's really where we're trying to push to tomorrow with the likes of collaborations with the Amazon, the AWS exchanges of this world, is very much trying to get that ecosystem so we can move to that much more just-in-time provisioning as the likes of Goldman are driving towards. And that was it from my side.
That was it. Okay, cool. We're going to ask John a few questions. So first of all, thanks for that intro to LSEG. I think that's I think that was, super interesting. And then also, you kind of teased us with a little bit of sort of the results that you achieved. But